If we were together in person this morning, I would ask you to raise a hand if you speak a second language. If you've studied another language beyond the basic entry level, you know that there's not always a one-to-one equivalent for every word. Some specific ideas don't have a corresponding word in another language. It's one of the reasons we sometimes hear multilingual communities speak a mixture of two languages. I've heard it called Spanglish. My experience of this was in the Peace Corps. All of us volunteers were native English speakers, and we had learned French in our training, and still more words came to us from local idioms in the country where we were serving. It wasn't uncommon in our English conversation to throw in French and local words. Those words were either more accurate or a quicker way to express a particular idea. After last week's sermon on love, loving our adversaries, a participant in our worship service reminded me that there are several different words for different kinds of love in other languages. In Greek alone, there are 6 different words for what we in English just have one word for. You've probably heard of eros, or sexual passion, and there's philia, or love of friendship. Ludus is a kind of playful love. Agape is probably the word that I would have been using last week. That's love for everyone. A long-standing love is called pragma, and not to be forgotten, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right, but philautia is love of self. So many different types of love. There's a huge body of poetry that explores a sense of love between people and the sacred. Written in different times, in different places, in different faith traditions, with different senses of love. These poems are a great look into different ways of understanding the sacred. And more importantly, through their beautifully expressive language, they invite us beyond an intellectual exercise of religion to experience the sacred in our own hearts. The sermon is based largely on a book titled Love Poems from God by Daniel Ladinsky. He's a renowned translator of the great Sufi poet Hafiz. So I'm going to share a few of the poems that he's translated in that book. Initially, I tried to divide these poems neatly between different religious traditions, assuming that I would find one type of love in Hindu poems and another type of love in Christian. That's not at all what emerged as I read, though. Quite the contrary. I found an array of different expressions of love, of the sacred, showed up in each of the religious traditions. One idea that shows up in every religious tradition I know of is that God or the sacred loves the world. There's a sense of comfort knowing that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, that love is big enough to hold you. Our universalist faith is anchored in that sense of big, big love. Historically, universalist theology was the idea that God wouldn't arbitrarily punish some people for eternity while rewarding only a few. On the contrary, God is about love and reconciliation, not just for a handful of people who are good enough, but for everyone. In our theology today, we might say more broadly and simply that we believe that in the end, love wins. There's a great sense of comfort in that idea that we are loved no matter where. Our story from the time for all ages was a poetic description of parental love for a child that follows through our lives, our adventures, hardships, and victories. I usually bring that book out to our worship services on Mother's Day or Father's Day. In that context, we're reminded that the love that finds us wherever we are, the love between generations, persists into adulthood and after death. The story says, if you're still my small babe or you're all the way grown, my promise to you is you're never alone. You're my angel, my darling, my star, and my love will find you wherever you are. With a little poetry and a little reflection on our own lives, it's not so difficult to imagine love that transcends death. A big, mysterious, comforting kind of love. That same big, mysterious, comforting kind of love is often attributed to the sacred. The poem that I found that speaks beautifully about God loving the world comes from Saint Francis of Assisi. Born into a wealthy family in 1182, Francis was drawn into the military. After he returned home with a deep faith, he devoted himself to helping the poor and the sick. So this is God would kneel down. I think God might be a little prejudiced. For once, he asked me to join him on a walk through this world. And we gazed into every heart on this earth. And I noticed he lingered a bit longer before any face that was weeping, and before any eyes that were laughing. And sometimes when we passed a soul in worship, God too would kneel down. I've come to learn God adores his creation. Whether we find it in children's book or a 13th century Catholic priest, that sense that we are loved is incredibly powerful stuff. Farther afield from our typical UU religious spiritual lives is poetry that speaks of relation to God in really erotic language. Several different poets I came across have one or two poems in their collection like this. It's beautiful poetry. While the sexualized language may seem strange at first, it invites us into a truly embodied spirituality. I can't say that I have had erotic expressions or experiences of the sacred, but I have at times in my life felt a deep connection with the earth that was, I'll say, visceral. Sensing the flow of life in my own body mirrored in the flow of a river, or being aware of the deep roots in the plants around me and sensing my own rootedness and dependence on the earth. Perhaps some of you have had your own visceral engagement with the sacred. Maybe it's even been on the verge of erotic. The female poet Mirabai wrote one of the most forward of these spiritual poems. She was a very well-known poet in India in the early 1500s. Her songs were sung by Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs alike. Here is Mira's poem, I Want You to Have This. I want you to have this. All the beauty in my eyes, all the grace of my mouth, all the splendor of my strength, all the wonder of the musk parts of my body. For are we not talking about real love? Real love? Many of the poets I read this week spoke of relation with the divine in a way that was very personal, describing a God with human-like feelings and emotions. In some cases, it looks like parental love. In other poems, it was more like friendship. And still others, it was romantic or erotic. Not all of the poetry, though, depicts that kind of conscious God. Another vein of the poetry that may be more in line with UU spirituality speaks about a sense of unity that we might feel with the sacred. This poetry is less about a God that is out there and more about a deep sense of knowing that we are a part of a great mystery of the universe. This is another poem from Mira. This is called A Great Yogi. In my travels, I spent time with a great yogi. Once he said to me, "Become so still you hear the blood flowing through your veins." One night, as I sat in quiet, I seemed on the verge of entering a world inside so vast. I knew it was the source of all of us. This type of relating to the sacred may be more comfortable because it doesn't point to a conscious God of human emotions. And I may also be more comfortable because it is expressed clearly in our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Our transcendentalist forebears embraced a sense of spirituality that was very, very similar to Hinduism. It's the idea that in each of us rests a grain of the holy, a seed of potential. And that piece that's in each person is part of a larger, more beautiful, more powerful, more mysterious whole. If you listen closely, you hear it echoed in our first and seventh principles. We honor the inherent worth and dignity in every person. And we respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. In another poem that's also a story, we hear another interpretation of this idea of the fragments of the same sacred source resting in each person. It comes from the most beloved poet of Persia, Hafiz, who was writing in the 1300s. It's called Lousy at Math. Once a group of thieves stole a rare diamond, larger than 2 goose eggs. Its value could have easily bought 3,000 horses and 3,000 acres of the most fertile land in Shiraz. The thieves got drunk that night to celebrate their great haul, but during the course of the evening, the effects of the liquor and their mistrust of each other grew to such an extent, they decided to divide the stone into pieces. Of course, then the priceless became lost. Most everyone is lousy at math and does that to God, dissects the indivisible one by thinking, by saying, "This is my beloved. He looks like this and acts like that. How could the moron over there really be God?" A final category that I want to talk about of types of love centers around nature. These poems aren't about God per se, but they express a sense of meaning and connection to something bigger than the ordinary that many of us experience in nature. Maybe the Greeks missed out on naming one of the very important loves, a deep and abiding connection to nature that can feel very much like love. This poem comes from Spain in the 1500s, though it easily could have been written here in Lake Forest yesterday. It's from St. John of the Cross, called A Rabbit Noticed My Condition. I was sad one day and went for a walk. I sat in a field. A rabbit noticed my condition and came near. It often does not take more than that to help at times. To just be close to a creature who are so full of knowing, so full of love that they don't chat. They just gaze with their marvelous understanding. The poem that I want to leave you with today is also based in nature. More than a window into the author's own spirituality, I hope that you will take this as an invitation for your own spirituality. Religious life, spiritual life, finding a sense of grounding is partly what we think, but it's also what we feel and what we do. This poem from St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that life is full of opportunities to find beauty and to be enlivened. Our hands imbibe like roots. So I place them on what is beautiful in this world. And I fold them in prayer, and they draw from the heavens light. This is a very different sermon from my usual. It was fun learning about these different poets and diving into their world through their words. I wanted to bring you these poems not as a history lesson or as a literature lesson. I wanted to bring you poetry as a reminder of the variety and the depth at which we all can engage with the mystery and beauty of life. For some, that may be a friendly, loving relationship with God. For others, it may be a sense of connection with the universe or an emotional welling up in response to the awesome beauty of the natural world. This Sunday, this Valentine's Day, may our hearts be opened to experience awe and wonder and love for all that this world has to offer. Amen. It's our custom in worship to share half of the morning's offering with an organization that shares our values. This month, the organization that we're supporting is called the Advancement Project. They work to eliminate inequalities and expand economic and political opportunities for marginalized communities. You can learn more about them from the order of service. There's a link in the chat box to be able to give online or to give by text. So as we enjoy another piece of amazing music, may you give generously.
We're extinguishing the chalice by Martha Gal Munson. We extinguish this chalice here that it might grow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again.
May love permeate your every heartbeat. May faith guide your every step. May truth and compassion be your traveling companions. Go in peace and let the light within you be a blessing to the world.